All right, well, good morning. Let's get going here. We've got, it looks like about 8, 9 folks joining us here. We'll probably have a couple more join as we go on. Let me introduce myself. My name is Paul Merrill. I'm the principal software engineer and test and founder at Beaufort Fairmont Automated Testing Services. We focus on automated testing, and we help companies get to mature in their automated testing practices, whether it's by training or by working directly with them, doing coaching or whatever it is they need. I'll give you some more information about that as after we get through this presentation. But we talked last month. If you joined us last month, we did a talk at a high level, kind of the procedural level of syncing up Agile testing from the inside out, and that I had also given a Try Agile here in the Research Triangle Park. And today I'm going to dig into the actual technical part of that. So if you're a tester, if you're a developer, if you're an automation engineer, this is for you. We're going to get into code, and if you think code is not what you want to do, I completely understand, but I'll give you plenty of forewarning before we jump in there, and if you need to jump out at that time for whatever reason, because you get queasy looking at code or whatever, I'll give you that opportunity. I'd love to know why you drop out. If you do, that it would help me in understanding this presentation and doing it better the next time. So first, just a couple points of order. You may be looking off to the side over here. That's my main screen, and that's going to be where I'm doing some work here as we go along. You all have the ability to raise your hands if anything is going on. There's a button there in your control panel to raise your hand to ask questions. I really would like this to be a cooperative, collaborative thing. We have about 12 people on the call. That is sometimes good to know because it may make you feel more comfortable in sharing, and I'd really like this to be collaborative and cooperative here. So I think 12 might be a little too many to go around the circle and kind of see who all's here, but just know that you're not talking in front of a million people when you get on this call. We've got people, I know a number of different companies in the Research Triangle, and outside of that, I think we might actually have one from New Zealand today as well, so that's pretty exciting. So without further ado, let's get going. Please just make sure to stop me. If, for instance, you cannot see the slides, there is a slide deck that you should be able to see right now. You'll be able to see my code as we're working through this when we get to that point as well. You'll also be able to see me right now. So please just feel free to stop me as we get going. A little bit about myself. I showed you this slide last time. If you guys joined us then, I know a few of you did, and I'm happy to be back. My first Agile team was in 2002. That was an extreme programming team. Since then, I've done a whole lot of different things. My background is in software engineering, and that's kind of, I was a strong software engineer. I really like automated testing, and I like this niche. I like this world of automated testing and figuring out how to test tools. I've been in a number of different industries, done a lot of different roles, so I can look at this from a number of different perspectives. So I just kind of want to set the stage and set expectations today. So first we're going to talk about process from the inside out. We're going to talk at a high level, what are the steps to do it? We're going to get into the roles that people need to play, the roles that have to be taken care of in implementing this particular strategy, this technique of getting Agile testing synced up. This is not the only one. This is one that I know works and one that I like to implement at different companies. There are numerous others that can be implemented in parallel or at different times with this. But the roles and knowing the responsibilities are important, and I'm going to kind of run through those quickly because we're going to code. So I'm excited about that. Once again, if you're squeamish about code, just hang on to your seat there. Once again, stop me anytime to ask questions. We went over a little bit of this last time, and I want to make sure that you all have the, let me see if I can somehow do a message to you all with, not sure how to do this here. I will make sure to get you, here's chat, and I think I can do it to everyone. Let's see. Yes, entire audience send. Okay, so I just sent you a message with a link to a recording of last month if you didn't see it, so you can go back and kind of get some more context from that. Make sure to copy that link off somewhere. You can also get it on our website or Twitter or whatever from me. But kind of at a high level, I wanted to throw out this diagram and kind of talk about it again. So for anybody who wasn't with us, we're going to be talking about what I call a test driver. And a test driver is basically a tool that we use to interface with the code that's under test or the system under test. In this case, I've drawn out a very vague diagram here. The outside of this larger rectangle is the outer bounds of your application, or that's the way we're defining it here. You generally would have some type of user interface that's kind of on the outer bounds. Sometimes you have controllers, business logic, data model. In this hypothetical setup, this is the way that we've structured our application. And working on things from the inside out basically means that we're going to interact with these inner components before we interact with the outer ones. And the reason that we do trying to sync up dev and testing. And one of the things that's the biggest drawback and that causes the most latency in Agile environments between test and development is the wait time between when a user interface is created and when we can test. And many times what happens is developers like to work on things from the bottom up or from the inside out, so they might work on the data model or the business logic first and then kind of work their way out to the controls and the user interface. And so you've got testers hanging out waiting until the user interface is there. So we're going to talk about white box testing and how we do that, how we work from the inside out. In this case, I'm showing you we're going to work from the business logic. Now, the example that I gave last time was the example of an online retailer, you may remember. So let's think of the use case of, and I'm going to give you a more clear picture of what this is in just a minute, but let's think of an online retailer and that we want to have a very simple step of creating a sale. And so for a sale, we need several things. We need an identifier for the sale item, which we'll call an SKU. We need a start date for the sale, we need an end date for the sale, and then we need a discount for the sale price. So those are the four items that we're going to work with here. And if you think about it, there's a lot that you could do with just the logic of a sale. For instance, with the parameters that I gave you, or the variables that I gave you, we can do quite a number of things. It looks like we have a question here. Let me make sure that I take a break and the slide's going to be available. Yes, absolutely. The slides will be available. And in fact, this is being recorded right now, and I have another recording that'll be available as well. Just send a note if you want the slides. I don't always remember to do that. Thank you so much for your question, though, and I always want to try to get to those questions as we go along. Please stop me for those at any time. But with this idea of a sale, there are a number of different things that we could test just at the logical level. So can we create a sale at all? Can we create a valid sale? Can we see what the discounted price is? Is the discounted price correct? Can we create negative test cases like a negative discount, a negative percentage? Is that a valid use case? Probably not. Things like, can we put the end date before the start date and what happens? So those are things that we're going to kind of look at, and we'll actually build out a couple of test cases for that. But generally what you would see happen in building things from the inside out is that you might start with the business logic, for instance, and then work your way into the data model, so that originally where we were testing only the business logic, now maybe we test to make sure that we can input things into the business logic level and then verify that it got into the data model, for instance, or verify that we can get things out of the data model. Next, we might actually look at the controllers and then the user interface and work our way all the way out. So we've had plenty to do while we're waiting for the user interface to be created, and there were a lot of really good side effects to that as well, and benefits that we talked about in last month's webinar. At the level of the user interface, you may still have a test driver running those and driving those tests. Many times with my clients, we continue to do that because we see such a big bang for the buck out of a test driver. The test driver is things like Cucumber, Robot Framework, Gauge. These are human-readable scripts that tie into your test code, and that's important for a number of different reasons. Let's the process really briefly, and once again, please feel free to raise your hand or stop me for questions. Maybe I'll just take a quick break here and see if there are any questions, any thoughts on these slides so far. I want to make sure that we all get plenty of opportunities to jump in here and make sure that we get all our questions answered. Feel free to either raise your hand or just submit a question. Looks like none so far, and I don't want to waste time waiting for questions that aren't there. So the process, let's talk about the process of this. I've outlined 7 steps here first we start out by defining the interface. And what that means is we have a developer who's going to be developing code for this story or this task. We have a tester who's going to be writing test cases, creating test cases for this code. And then we have this interface that has to happen between the test driver and the system under test. And that place where the two intersect is your interface. In the case that we're going to work on today, we're actually going to use a proper interface, a Java interface, to define that, as well as the constructor and the definition of the constructor being that interface. In other cases, you might have a REST API, for instance, and that might be your interface. It may actually be a user interface, but you need to define these things up front. And one of the best places to do that is when you are in your planning stages. So if you're sitting down and if your team does estimation of tasks, sitting down and actually during that session defining how are we going to test this? How is the test driver going to interface with the code? And at least if we have that at a high level, then we're going to be better able to succeed. We have to have some understanding of how we're going to work together on this. So that's called defining the interface. I'm not going to go through each of these in depth because to walk through them together, but just really quickly, we go through writing a test that's next. We create fixtures after that so that those test scripts will work. Then we fake out the SUT, or the system under test. And that's necessary because we don't have the real system under test yet. So we're going to fake it until we make it. Repeat steps 1 through 4 as needed until we get to a point we're comfortable with the level of risk that's accepted, where we feel like we've tested as much as we need to test. Or we've created acceptance tests, or whatever it is you need to do in your environment. Then we're going to replace the fake with the real SUT. And at that point, we're going to see, does the developer's code actually work? And then we'll fix whatever issues come up from that. Many times they do, because testers are so good at writing test cases. That's usually what happens. I said I want to talk about roles, and these are the ways that I've defined them. Number one, we have a scribe, and this is not necessarily a tester, although it usually is. The scribe is the person who's actually going to write down the test cases. They're going to create the test scripts in our test driver. Today we're going to be using Cucumber. This person also advises on naming and usage of the step definitions. They're like the customer for the fixtures, right? So the person who's writing those fixtures has to work with the scribe in order to make sure that it's usable, that it's easily understandable. That's your customer, and that's the person that you want to be completely satisfied with the work you're doing when you're creating these fixtures. The scribe is also going to make sure that when these fixtures are written, it's not only understandable to the scribe and to the toolsmith and developer, but also it's understandable at a high level to any of your business folks, your product managers, your product owners, stakeholders, things like that, because we want these people to be able to go in and understand exactly what's going on in the system, what we're testing, and make sure that the requirements or the stories that they come up with are in line with what we've actually done and working properly. So we want very human readable scripts, and the scribe is responsible for making sure that that happens. The toolsmith is the person that's in the middle writing the fixture code, and this is someone who's not someone who was manually testing and has never done programming as of yesterday. This is someone who has a deep understanding of software engineering, a very clear understanding of how to make code accessible to test, someone who believes that test cases and testing and testers are first-class citizens within the organization and within the team. This is someone who works very to negotiate with each of the other roles here about how these things are going to work. They negotiate out the interface that we described earlier and help to make sure that we can test what we need to test. The developer, we all know who a developer is, they write the code, but their role here might be a little different in that we're making sure that they're making sure that they're writing testable code that is testable for the toolsmith to tie into and for the scribe to write from. So that is the high level stuff. This is the point where if you're squeamish about code, you might want to jump out, but we're not going to get so deep into the code that you just get lost. I want to break really quick for some questions. It looks like we have one from Ed, and you guys are welcome to join in and ask your question out loud if you'd like. All you have to do is raise your hand, and I'll make sure to recognize, and we can go from there. Ed asks, So the toolsmith is the toolsmith on the QA team, or are they the development team? That's a really good question, and I think it comes down to text and what your resources are and how your team works. We're talking about agile testing here, so my feeling on this, if we're in an agile environment, everybody's on the same team. So we're on one Scrum team, one agile team together, and we're all working toward the same goal. And within agile, many times you have people switching roles and doing different things over time. We may have testers doing some programming if they're able to do that. Every once in a while, we may have developers coming in and doing some testing from time to time. That was one of the things that I enjoyed the most about working on agile teams as an individual contributor, was jumping in and being able to do all of these different roles. In general, the toolsmith is someone that you hire, is a person with strong development background. The ones that I have seen work out the most and the best are the ones who have already decided to focus on the niche of automated testing. It's one of the roles that we do so well at Beaufort Fairmont, something that I really enjoy doing and working with teams on. So this may be a person who has a test background or has some test background. They're very, very skilled at testing. Ed, I hope I answered your question. Please feel free to raise your hand if you want clarification or anything, or just jump in some other way. We have another question here from Benjamin. And Benjamin asks, is it reasonable to think that a product owner would act as a scribe? I love that question. That's a really interesting way to phrase it too. I'm going to read it again. Is it reasonable to think that a product owner would act as a scribe? I think that's a reasonable thought. Yes, I think that is reasonable to think that. In practice, what I have seen many times is that it is incredibly rare that a product owner will jump in and be your scribe. The reason that it's rare is a couple things. Number one, a product owner is generally not thinking about how to test the code. So them only scribe if part of these test cases is to validate the product or to verify that the product works properly. They're not going to be thinking about the negative test cases, the boundary conditions, all the things that a tester mindset would give you. They could potentially do a really great job with acceptance tests and creating scripts that denote this is what I expected to happen when you create this functionality, and you can use this acceptance test within your definition of done to prove that you're actually done with the code, and I will come back later and verify it. In practice, I just very rarely see that happening. Product owner, along with product managers, project managers, I think it's very easy as a technical person to not know what they're doing when they're not with your team. I think that's just, it's very easy to say, what in the world do they do all day? They're very busy. They have a lot going on, and I can tell you firsthand experience from having sat down and tried to learn a market to myself. Understanding the market that a product is in can be an absolutely full-time job. Understanding what's going on in that market all the time, who the players are, who the competitors are, what the competitors are doing, and this is what you want your product owner or product manager doing, is you want them to understand where this industry, this field is going better than anyone else and that makes it so that your company can compete the strongest. So is it reasonable to think that they might act as a scribe? Sure. Is it likely that they'll act as a scribe? I don't think so. I have seen it happen, I have seen it work, but it's much more rare than having a tester step in as a scribe. So hopefully that answers your question, Benjamin. If you have anything else or anybody else has got questions, please jump in here, ask them, raise your hands, whatever. I am trying to keep my eye on that. Let's jump into some code. So already we talked about a little bit here. As a customer, I want to know if an item is on sale, its discounted price, the discount amount, and when the sale starts and ends, so that I can decide if or when I want to purchase it. That's what customers do, right? We want to know if there's a sale on, am I going to purchase it while it's on sale, when's the sale going to end, so I know the last day to get it for that good price. So that's our story, and you'll notice there's no implementation specific things here, and we're going to use exactly what I said we're going to use, which is working from the inside out on this, and I'm going to jump code here. So for those of you familiar with Cucumber and Java, this is going to be easy. We're doing things today. Well, I won't say easy, but you will be familiar. We're going to be working in Java. I'm going to be using the Eclipse IDE, which hopefully you see in front of you right now. If you don't, please raise your hand or ask a question or reach out to me somehow through this tool, GoToWebinar, and I'll do what I can to help you see this. But you should be seeing my IDE, and you should see a sale test.feature up on the screen right now. This is Eclipse. Don't be scared of it. You don't need to do anything with it right now. I will make the code available to you if you would like it afterwards. It may not be today, but I will make it available to you. Just shoot me an email afterwards, paul@beaufortfairmont.com, and I'll give you all of my contact information later as well. But let's get started. So Cucumber, Java, in Eclipse. Let's look at our process. I want to go through this step by step with you. So I wonder how I zoom in here. Can I zoom in? There we go. Zoom in. That might be a little better. Okay, so define the interface. This is something that we've already done with the developer. We sat down and defined the interface, and we know that what we're going to do is we're going to have a Java interface I mentioned, and I'm going to create it. It's going to be called iSale. This may be done by the toolsmith. Probably is more likely done by the developer. The interface that we agreed to has one publicly accessible method called getPrice, and getPrice is going to have two things. We want to pass in an SKU, and we want to pass in a date, and the date is the date on which there is a sale. So this is like asking, hey, is there a sale today, right? If we were to pass in today's date. So let me, all this is always harder when people are watching you, so keep that in mind as I'm going along here. Thank you for your patience when we have little things like that to do. So our interface is defined. So let's go back to our steps. Interface. Second step is writing a test script. So let's get going on that. Let's write a test script. Luckily, I've done this before, and I've written a few scripts for us. So I'm going to go steal one here. And, oops. This is the part where I would say, please pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. And so let's create our first test script. This is what it's going to look like. It's a simple sale. In Cucumber, you define a feature and you define a scenario. I should probably have more language up here with the story to better identify what this feature is and what it does. And the scenario might be better named, but we're trying to go through this kind of quick and dirty as our time is somewhat limited here. I've estimated this at about an hour with questions and everything. So the first step is given a user creates a sale for an item, and this is the item number or the SKU with a discount of 5% starting on yesterday and ending on tomorrow, then the sale is valid. So that's our script. So one of the things that's really nice about Cucumber is you can just and run that, and remember, we have no code written, we haven't done anything yet, and provided I save the file right, we can go ahead and run this, and we see that we have one scenario with two steps, and it tells us, hey, you did not implement the steps. So let's look at this. We've got a script written, and what was the next step? So we wrote our test script. The next is create fixtures. In the case of this instance, and in the case of working with Cucumber, you have what are called step definitions. And when you run a test case or a scenario where the test steps are not yet defined, it is nice enough, Cucumber is nice enough to print out what that step would look like, or some kind of scaffolding for it, I guess is a way to say that. So let me just get all my imports done here. I thought it just did not work. Come on. Great. So that's defined. Let's run it again. We still haven't done anything interesting yet, have we? We've just started defining test cases. So this is what happens when you when you implement the steps that are given by Cucumber. We get a pending exception, and that's coming from here. Basically, it's just giving a shell of a method to learn what to do. A little bit of what's going on here. We're taking this line right here, and we are making it so that something will be done when that line runs. And for that to happen, we have this method which actually goes in and tries to make sense of what we've done here. And I'm not going to write all of this code right now. I've cheated and I already have some of it done, so I want to go grab it real quick for us, and I'll talk you through what we're doing here. For the first step, which is basically we've got a few arguments. SKU string was the first one. The discount string is the second one. The third one was your start date string. The fourth one is your end date string. And we created an iSale. We don't have a fake sale here. Well, I guess I'm skipping steps here, but basically we've got these parameters matched to what we have over here. So this is your SKU string that's going to be passed in through SKU string. The next one is your discount here. The next is your start date and end date. We've defined all of those. Basically, we have to parse them out from strings into a proper type. So that's what this language is doing. And we agreed with the developer as part of our defining the interface that the interface would, for the constructor of a sale, take in an SKU that is of type string, a discount that's of type double, a start date which is of type date, and an end date which is of type date, rather than the strings that we're passing in here. So if you're a tester, one of the things that would be good to know in this particular case is in working with the toolsmith is going to say, all right, so look, you can't put A, B, C, D, E into the start date field and think that the system under test is actually going to be invalidated because of that. Instead, the framework is going to handle that and filter that out. And that's what this message right here is telling us: cannot use invalid discount or format date with this step definition. The constructor is really the thing that we're going to focus on here. Let's go ahead and create this fake sale. So if we go back and we look at our steps, in our steps we have defined the interface. We did that. We have a test script that we're starting. We're creating fixtures. We've done some of that. And now we're going to fake out the system under test. And we're doing that by working on this one specific class, and we're creating a fake sale. So here's our fake sale. It's going to return just whatever price at this point, because we don't care. And I know all the testers listening to me say, how can we not care? At this point we don't care, and I'll explain it in just a few minutes here. The last thing that we have to do is we've got to create this constructor in the fake. Oh, that's not what I wanted. Bear with me here. In the fake sale. So we've got this SKU, and this is our constructor for our fake. It's like a mock. If you're familiar with mocks, I'm basically creating a mock here. I originally was thinking I'd like to use actual mock objects and use Makito or JMock or something like that, but it got more complicated than I wanted, so I'd be happy to walk through something like that with someone at some other time. And if that's something you guys want to learn about mock objects, please let me know. But today we're just going to make a very basic mock. I'm going to call it fake sale. We did that. The only other thing that I have to do here is create this field. So one of the other things that we agreed to with the developer in terms of defining our interface was that if the constructor fails, we're going, because of an argument, then we're going to throw an illegal argument exception. So that's what we're catching here. So now we can try to run this again. We're going to have a little more luck here. Or let's see if we're going to have a little more luck. So we got one step, or two steps, one scenario, and we still have something failing, and we're still pending here. So I know what I want to do. This is our validation step. So in our feature over here, we've got then the sale is valid. And in order to define right now at the simplest possible level, is the sale valid? I just want to know if I got an illegal argument exception from the call to the first step. So there are a couple coding issues here that I'm avoiding and walking by, and I understand all that, doing a couple things by side effect, and maybe that's not the best way to do this, but we're trying to get through a very simple example here, and I'd be happy to talk about any of those things later on with folks. But for the rest of us that didn't see those, let's just assert that the illegal argument exception is null, and that's going to be our validation point. Let's see where it is, junit.org. I think it's org.junit. Is that right? Because it's still got an error for some reason. Oh, 2 semicolons. Great. All right, so let's run this again and let's see how much farther along we are. And kind of the pattern that I'm following here is really just test-driven development. So if you're familiar with test-driven development, that's what we're doing. We're just doing it with a couple other considerations here. We're using Cucumber instead of unit tests. We're not doing a lot of refactoring yet, but that is kind of where this is based from Kent Beck's test-driven development. So at this point, we have a working test. Our test ran and it worked. We could validate that we created a correct sale. So now what step are we on? We're going through the process here. We faked out the SUT. We run our test. We have everything working. So we just start repeating and as we build up this set of test scripts. So let's create a couple more. And since we've done something that was very easy, which was a valid sale, let's make something invalid. And let's try an invalid date range and do what I mentioned before, which is the start date is after the end date. I think we can all concede that 2017 is after 15. So that should be invalid. And then we need one more step. We need the sale is invalid. So I'm going to run this. It's going to create my, my fixture code here. Remember our steps. So write a test script, that's what we just did. Create fixtures, so we ran this. It came up with a implementation that's missing. I'm going to grab that, go back into our step definitions, and put that guy in there. And then I already know that for an invalid sale to happen, I would have gotten an illegal argument exception. So my validation point is just going to be assert not null. So we're going to say we didn't get an exception, or sorry, we got an exception rather than not getting one. So we can run this again. And I'm going to break here in just a minute and we'll get some questions going. But if we run that, we get an assertion error. And so what that means is that the test case failed, which is what we wanted. We expected that if we had code that didn't validate a date range, that we would get a failure on this test. And so when you see an exception like this in this methodology, understand that what you're seeing is the result of the fixture code. And we're trying to build out this fixture code or our step definitions. So since we don't have an actual system under test here, we want an assertion error. This tells us that our fixture is working correctly. Once we plug in the real code, we don't want to see these and we want to start fixing the real code. But we don't care about this fake sale. The only reason it's there is to tell us whether or not the fixture worked and to allow us to build the fixture up with something that looks like a sale. Something that looks like a sale is going to be an iSale. So our fake class is an iSale. It looks just like a sale. And the developer is going to implement this iSale with a real sale. And that'll be one of our next steps. We can do one more test here just to kind of keep us moving along. And I'm going to do a negative discount rate. And so I'm just going to put a negative there. I'm going to change these values back to something that is valid. And let's run these guys again, or these tests again. And while I'm doing that, any questions or thoughts as we're going along, feel free to raise your hand and jump in. Once again, we have a small group here. It's only 12, 13 people. listening in, so don't be shy. If I can do it, you can do it. What we see as a result there is we have two failures, and that's what we would expect. Our failures are on invalid date range and negative discount. So we've built up a framework that works in several situations. Let's go ahead and move on in this process and keep going along here. So we've repeated these several times, and now we've got somewhat of a test suite created. We've got about 3 tests in a normal situation. Testers are going to be going so fast at this point that they'll have 20, 30, 40 test cases, hopefully, before the developer is ready at all with their code. The developer comes in and says, okay, now I've got the real software written. So let's plug that in and let's see how it works. In our case, there's no developer here, there's just me. So I'm going to play the developer at this point, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a sale like they would have created. And there are a number of different ways that you could perhaps handle introducing the real sale. At this point, the fake sale doesn't matter to us. We might keep it around for a few days or something, just in case we need to test something out or in case we need to test our fixture code. But in general, we don't need that fake sale anymore. That was code scaffolding. That was something that is gone. We've used it for its purpose, and now we can throw it away. What did I do wrong here? Let's make sure that I get a valid. It should have main here, I believe. For some reason, I must have accidentally deleted that at some point. I'll rewrite this one. Bear with me here. I guess it doesn't matter where it goes. Normally this would go in main, but today it's just going to go in test. So here's our sale. You notice that it automatically implemented the interface here. We still have some compile problems. They are the fact that we don't have a constructor defined in sale. Boom, constructor is created. We can go back and run our tests. And if this developer has done their job, then everything is going to pass, right? And if our fixture is right, if our toolsmith has done his or her job, then it's going to pass. And lo and behold, the developer did not do all of their job. There are some issues here. One is with the invalid date range, just like our fake. It's as if they did nothing at all, and you just saw me do nothing at all, so that makes sense. Let's go back to the sale and let's start handling these just really quickly, as that's the next part of our process here. So replace the fake with the real SUT and then the SUT. So let's do this very quickly. If we know that the discount failed, so if the discount is less than 0, we agreed that we would throw a new illegal argument exception. So hopefully that fixes one of the issues. Let's see if it fixes the negative discount. Great, so one of our failures went away, which was the negative discount. Now we just have the invalid date range. I'm going to fix that real quick, and then we can get to chatting. I want to hear your thoughts about this. So be thinking of questions. If nobody asks any, I'll just have to start calling on people, I guess. This is less than 0, I believe. Well, let's keep our curlies looking just like they do above. So, illegal. Oops, illegal argument exception. Great, and let's see if this passes. Great. And so what we were, everything passed here. We can see that in 2 ways. One is this JUnit plugin. The other, and those are our 3 scenarios there. The other is on the console. So in a typical situation, you would have a lot more code written by the developer when they come online. That's kind of what we're doing, is we're finding ways to have people work in parallel. The ways that we did that were we had the tester starting to write scripts. They could be, or the scribe writing scripts, which is a lot of times a tester. So they can be off writing those scripts on their own. The toolsmith, whoever that is, your automation engineer, a developer, whoever, is sitting down and writing the fixture code. They're using a tool like a mock or a fake in order to keep the fixture going, and as soon as they get scripts from the scribe, they're going to start making sure that all the fixture code is there, the step definitions, whatever we have there. And then you have the developer who's off writing their scripts as well. Now, we are on an Agile team, that's what we were talking about, so hopefully there's a lot of communication going on and everybody's working toward the same goal, and they're working on a set of tasks that are all tightly tied together. I want to open up to some questions. So Craig has a question, and his question is, any advice on test frameworks to use, Cucumber, Jasmine, or something else for AngularJS with Web API backend? Right, so that's a loaded question. All right, so any advice to use on test frameworks with for AngularJS and a Web API backend? So let me just kind of take a step back here, and where I'm trying to get with this is for us to look at the idea of testing as different pieces. And if the question is which one framework will work in all cases, that's usually not, you're usually not going to have a good answer for that. I don't have an answer for that because I haven't seen one that works in all cases. What I like to do is use the proper framework for the proper use case or the proper scenario. So in this case, we were testing business logic, and we just used JUnit and Java and Cucumber. You could use any other framework you wanted there. I mentioned Robot Framework and Gauge. I have a very strong preference for using a test driver, and the reason for that is that I like to have high visibility and high transparency between stakeholders and those doing the work. So using Cucumber or Gauge, I think, is a must for white box testing. At the user interface level, you may use a test driver, you may use something else. For Angular, there is a tool called Protractor, which has gotten a lot of high praise. There are a number of other, you've mentioned a number of these out there. Many times you can tie a test driver into some Selenium type tool to get in and actually work with the UI. Lots of people on trying to test UIs will mock out everything behind the UI, especially in the JavaScript world, which is where it looks like you are if you're mentioning AngularJS. A web API backend, I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that, if it's a RESTful API or something else. There are lots of good tools out there for doing that. Many times what I see is that it's easier to just quickly build up a framework for testing RESTful APIs. If you're using SOAP or something else, there are some other tools out there for that as well. The key that I'm trying to get to here is how do we approach this? And you know, you may need different tools for different pieces here. So hopefully that answers your question, Craig. If not, please raise your hand or ask again. I'm going to jump onto another question. And I'd love to have people actually, you know, talking here. If you want to raise your hand and ask a question, I will jump you in front of the other two questions here, just as a little incentive. Is there a disadvantage, asked Benjamin, is there a disadvantage to the scribe and toolsmith being the same person? These are some really great questions. This is fun. Is there a disadvantage to the scribe and toolsmith being the same person? Probably. I mean, there are disadvantages and advantages to everything, pros and cons. I guess the disadvantage that I would see there, if they are the same person, would be it's sometimes easy to put the blinders on and focus specifically on how tests work. Sometimes it's easy to put the blinders on and focus specifically on how the code works. If you have a sufficiently mature toolsmith, scribe type person here that can see beyond the blinders and have a wider view of things, you can really make some headway in that way. I think the other disadvantage is time. So generally your toolsmith, what works for me is having a full-time toolsmith, and that person is a software engineer. They're working full-time writing code. They don't have time to write all the test cases. The biggest benefit to this particular approach is that you have more than one person working on it. You can work things in parallel. You can build up a test suite very, very fast if you have people that are scribed specifically and not taking on other activities like a toolsmith. Also, I tend to see that testers are the best scribes in a lot of cases. They're thinking about things with a testing mindset. So those would be some of the thoughts that I have there. Hopefully I answered your question, Benjamin. If not, please jump in and ask again. Ed has a question. Any specific reason you use Java, or can C# work just as well? Yes. So I just had to pick a language and do something. I could have very easily picked, C# or JavaScript or Objective-C or Ruby or whatever. Yes, so if you, one of the things that people tend to fall back on in terms of choosing tools to work with, kind of a rule of thumb a lot of people have that I don't necessarily have, is the idea that whatever your developers are working with, whatever the stack is that is being used in production, is what your automation engineers, your tool smith over here should use as well. I don't necessarily subscribe to that type of thinking. I don't know if that's kind of what you're getting at there as well, but it can be incredibly helpful to do that. And the reason that most people continue to say that and to want to use that is, number one, consistency. People like consistency. Number two, you can go in and leverage your developers if you have problems in writing these tools and in creating these fixtures. And that tends to be the case because most of the time what we have is toolsmiths who are not solid software engineers. They are people who do a terrific job with what they do, but their background probably came from testing. They've had to learn creating software on their own. They may not have worked in production environments on creating real production level software and understanding all the ins and outs of how to build good, solid software. So that is one reason why you would use the same language between your toolsmith and your developers. The reasons you might not, I think, sometimes can outweigh. Those reasons are, if you think about the market for automation engineers, lots of developers are getting into things like Clojure and Elixir and new languages, Go, and other functional languages like these, like a couple of those anyway. And those languages, there's a much smaller number of people who know them. The majority of the people that I see that are out there right now that work as automation engineers or as toolsmiths, as we've named the role here, they have worked in Java or C#, they've worked in C or C++, they've worked in some of the bigger languages, the languages that have been out there for longer. Ruby is one of them as well. So if you're going to use a different language between the two, one reason might be in who you can hire for the roles. For instance, if you need to go out and hire a toolsmith and you've already decided that the toolsmith needs to be writing in Elixir, you're going to be hard-pressed to find a really good one. So those are some things that I would think about with that. A lot of people talk about how easy a language is to pick up or not, and I've heard people talk about how easy one language is to pick up as opposed to another. I'm sure that's the case for some people, but I think it varies from person to person. Each language has different pluses and minuses. Your context has a lot to do with that, so it's hard for me to recommend one language over another. It really is something that you need to sit down with your organization. It's something that we do in tool selection, is working through those questions with you. Thanks so much, Ed. Make sure that I answered your question right. Tell me if I didn't. Craig was just responding here that definitely understand different tools for different pieces. I hope I did get to your question there and answer it clearly. I had estimated this at about an hour. We're starting to come up on that. I'm totally open to answering more questions here, and I'd love to have them. I like the interaction, and I see Craig's response there. I want to kind of drill into, I mean, I guess we've drilled into everything here. We talked about these different roles. Different people play different roles at different times, and it can really help with career growth. It can help with how the team builds a product. How the team grows specifically. Sometimes if you're a Scrum Master, you just need a tester to see things a different way, or you need a developer to see things a different way. And getting them to jump over and do a different role can really help with understanding why it is we're asking to do certain things. Look, there's still plenty of time here. I've got the next 10 minutes or more. If you've got questions, if you want to talk about things, I really appreciate your being here, joining in with me. I hope that this is beneficial to you. I do want to send out a poll real quick. I don't think I did this already, but I have this poll about the next session of this. We'll be doing another webinar in September, and in September, I'd like to know what you'd like to talk about. And I've got several things on my mind that I'd like to talk about, but I'd like to hear what you have to think as well. So I've given you a poll through your GoToWebinar console here, and I'd love for folks to vote on what they want. If you select other, I'd like to know what that is somehow. So if you could message me or something else. Data strategies for testing, what that means is we use data within our test cases. How do we manage that data? How do we set up situations such that test cases will work again and again and again by managing our data correctly? One of the first things that any automation engineer and plenty of testers run into is the idea that we sit down and we start writing a test case and we just base it on the data that's already in the system. Well, what happens when we need to refresh that system, or when that data gets corrupt, or when someone else messes with it? And how do we avoid that? And then what are the constraining factors around that? This is a talk that I've given locally here in RTP. I've given it at a number of different conferences, and I'll be giving it at STP out in September, and then also in October out in Anaheim. And potentially other places as well. I'm also writing quite a bit about this because I think it's something that just hasn't been formalized. The other piece of this is why people have to like you for your automation to work. So this is more soft skills than data strategies. This is kind of saying, all right, so what are some of the other things that we have to think about for automation to work? How do we work with our product owners? How do we work with product managers? How do Scrum teams work together? What are all these touch points, and why are they important? Who is DevOps? Who are the ops folks that are helping us? What is it that they need? So those are kind of those two, and I'd love to find something more to your liking if you'd like to vote for the other option there as well. I've got a slide. Thank you so far. We've got about 80% of people voting, and it looks like data strategies is winning there. I would love to get in touch with you guys. I know that a couple of you have already been on these calls before, and I'd love to sit down and have a cup of coffee sometime, get on the phone or Skype or something and chat. This is my phone number here. If you have questions, if you want to get together for a consultation, we'd like to sit down with folks who are interested in using our services and make sure that they have the opportunity to get to know us. We have the opportunity to get to know them. And that we can begin building those relationships together. I am noticing that there's a couple other questions real quick. I'm just going to go through the slide, and then we'll get back to those questions. This is me. You know who I am and what I do. If you like what you're hearing here and you just like the sound of my voice, I work with my buddy James Jeffers on Reflection as a Service, which is a podcast about software engineering and entrepreneurship. So we talk about those. We have guests on about half of the episodes. We have guests. The others are James and I talking about our thoughts. The idea is we're going to reflect on these ideas and provide it to you as a service through this podcast. I do writing on the corporate blog post. Make sure to I'll be happy to send these slides to folks who want them. So just email me if you want them. My email address is down here, paul@beaufortfairmont.com. Phone number again. Follow me on Twitter. Like us on Facebook. And make sure to engage us in those ways. So a couple other questions here, one by Benjamin. Benjamin says, so would you use the Toolsmith role for writing all levels of the testing pyramid? Unit tests, CDC tests, API tests, I guess that's context, I'm not sure what CDC is, E2E tests as well, maybe that's context driven or something. So I think he's talking about the test pyramid that Mike Cohn created, and at the top of the pyramid you have, he specifies, I believe, UI tests. I'm not sure if he says UI or end-to-end. And then in the middle layer you have services, which are things like interacting with components in the system directly to test them, things where you have more than one unit working together and you want to test those integrations or you want to test services like your API tests or full API tests might be that middle layer. And then at the bottom, the wide bottom, you have unit tests. So those are the three layers that he's referring to there. You can also hear them referred to as E2E tests, integration tests, and unit tests. I might switch back and forth between those as I'm talking here. Would I have the same toolsmith? Would I use the toolsmith for writing all levels in the testing pyramid? Well, I mean, there's a whole lot to that question, and your particular context will define that. Unit tests specifically, I believe, are much better written by developers while they're writing the code. When you develop code in a test-first manner, you end up with a better designed piece of code. You end up with a more loosely coupled but highly cohesive piece of code. You have a more testable type of code, and it leads to being able to do some of these other levels better. In fact, many times the services that you create when you're working on unit, things that you mock out, all of that can assist in those other layers. I like developers doing that work. That's my strong preference. We do from time to time jump in and do unit testing for folks if there's a good reason to do it, if for instance they believe that we can be beneficial in doing that. The scribe, the toolsmith may jump in and do some of these. In this case, I'm using the toolsmith role specifically for integration testing. I guess it could be API testing as well. And they might do all of those two layers. I could definitely see some play back and forth between a developer and a toolsmith because there might be things where you just need the expertise of the developer, their understanding of the domain to accomplish certain things like writing certain services that may help you in your testing or things like that. I don't have a hard and fast rule there. It's context dependent. I think many times on a given team you have one toolsmith and a person takes on that role, and that's just fine for teams where that works. Hopefully I've answered your question there, Benjamin. I guess the other question here, let's see, so would you have the same, you're saying scribe role as well, Benjamin, so would you have the same scribe for I guess for all tests? You know, that's a role I can see. There are plenty of teams where you have multiple testers and they're each working as scribes on the same piece of code. You could have, there are instances where teams bring in, plenty of times you bring in different people into a Scrum team for one sprint or two sprints or four sprints. Teams tend to change in Agile, and so you have people shifting in and out of those roles. I could see different people playing the role of scribe. I think it's really beneficial to have a developer every once in a while jump in and do that. I think that it's helpful to the developer to think through what you're going to test as opposed to how you're going to create a solution. It helps with their maturity, it helps with their growth as a developer, and they'll write better code because of it if they assimilate that information. He has a question here. Any advice on how to answer the "that's not my swim lane" pushback when testers or devs say that they would be wasting time playing other roles, but maybe why people have to like you for automated testing to succeed is the issue I'm facing? Maybe so, Craig. So you're getting pushback when you ask people to play different roles. Well, I'm not sure how to answer that in your particular case. You can take the carrot or the stick idea. Either you create incentives for folks to jump in, or you have punishments for that. I think that punishment rarely works in a positive manner. People generally respond to incentives very well. I think that you know, I think that's just the growth of the team and the culture of the team. If you're getting pushback on roles, you know, what is that pushback coming from? I think it's really important to sit down with that individual in a kind of a one-on-one situation. If you're the right person, an appropriate person, do that and really get a clear understanding of what it is they want to achieve and why they're here. There are plenty of people who go to work every day and they're there to work. They know their role, they're comfortable in it, they don't want to switch roles, but they do a terrific job for the team in that role, and the team needs them in that role. So in those cases, maybe it's not very important for them to switch roles. Maybe that's just something that's not going to happen. In other cases, you have people who have never seen other roles. They want to learn. They want to jump in on those. Self-selecting into knowledge, self-selecting into maturity, into growth is very, very powerful, meaning when people choose to do something of their own accord. Now, that can be guided by performance reviews. It can be guided by mentoring and those types of things. But in my opinion, it is incredibly important for developers to work in tester roles. It's incredibly important for testers to get insight into development and to go with any of those roles, whether Scrum Master or Product Owner or whatever, if the person has the capability and wants to. Not sure I answered your question there, Craig. We can come back to it if I haven't. Let's see, another one from Ed. I think Ed and I might get together after this. Ed, just if you want to call me right after this, or we can do this. The number that's up there. Consumer-driven contract was what CDC stood for. Any advice about career advancement, skill development is a good one. Okay, well, hopefully I gave some there. Great. Well, those are all the questions that we have. We're right at 11 o'clock. I promised you an hour, and we're at an hour. I don't want to take you any longer than that. Once again, I'd very much like to get to know you folks. Start creating some relationships. I like getting to know people in the area. I love learning about the companies that are here. It helps me and helps my company when we debrief to be able to go back to our customers and share with them what we've learned in a non-IP violating type of way, of course. So please get with me. Let's get together and find some time to chat. Each of you, I'd love to do that, and I may reach out to some of you as we go along. Really appreciate your time here. Appreciate all of your interactions. I'd love to hear feedback about this. If you have it, feel free to send it to any of these things. And I will be reaching out to you about the next one of these in September. So thank you very much. Everybody have a terrific weekend, and especially those like Stephanie who are going to the beach, Stephanie, and I'll be going to the beach as well. So y'all have a good one. Thank you very, very much.